All right, good morning. We have made it to the last week before Christmas. So I thank you guys so much for paying attention and staying focused and giving me 100% of your effort. We're going to do our review today that's going to go over everything that we've learned since I've been out, because the next time you come into class, you will be taking your CDA on the laptops, okay? So today is very important. I know it's easy to get distracted with all the Santa Claus hats and red and green and all this kind of stuff, but this is your CDA, and I really want you guys to be successful, so you guys have to focus. So the plan for today is to go over the warm-up. Anybody who volunteered to put answers on the board, you have just given yourself 5 points extra credit for your CDA. Okay, and Ms. Hall will take notes of that. After the warm-up, you're going to get your study guide for your CDA. As always, that study guide looks almost exactly like your CDA, with the exception of the majority of problems that are on your study guide are not multiple choice, and you know they are on your CDA. I think you have 2 or 3 short response questions for your CDA as always, and the majority of them are multiple choice. You do have 21 problems on your CDA this time, so that makes them a little under 4 points. A little under 5 points each, okay? So we want to make sure that we're doing our best, because you cannot miss more than 5 problems and pass, okay? So I'm going to do a complete review today. Please make sure that you're sitting down and you're focused, no talking or playing. I appreciate the behavior changes that Ms. Hall reported to me, that you guys were on task and doing well by the end of last week. So you guys please help her out. She's having some back problems today, so she's going to be sitting down at the desk while you guys are working on your study guide. If you have any questions, it is your responsibility to go ask for help, okay? I've given you hints on your study guide so that I can point you in the right direction so you don't have to get up as often. But you can use your partner, and again, if you're working alone, you can use your earphones. But all of that is to make sure that you're working. So this is not sit down and talk for the rest of the class. This is let's focus so I can get my grade right before we end this year, okay? So 1 is a review on how to find the value of either x or y by using the graph. So we're going to use the graph for number 1, for number 3, and number 4, and it's all going to be the same graph over here. Alright, so let's look at what they gave me. A says, what is f of negative 4? Now what you have to remember to do this is that the number that's inside the parentheses, which in this case is negative 4, is an x value. Okay? So if I gave you x, then that means they want you to give them the y value. So we're going to go to where x is negative 4 on the graph. Remember, x goes side to side, so this is my x-axis. And we're going to go to where x is negative 4, which is right here. But we have to go up. You have to find the dot for the zigzag line. So I have to stay where x is 4 and just find the dot. Now that we found the dot, you can tell me what the y value is for this dot. So to find the y value, I simply just go over. And the y value for my dot would be 2. So the f of negative 4 is 2. This is very important because when you find rate of change, you have to be able to use the x values to get your y values in order to use the slope formula, okay? So when we look at B, this time I'm asking you what is x. So you know you're going to be giving me an x value. That means I could not have given you x. I gave you y. And remember that f of x and y are the same thing. So whenever I see f of x, you can cross it out and you can just put y. That way it looks more like what you're used to with just x and y. So this time we go to the y-axis and we go to where y is negative 2. Well, the y-axis goes straight up and down. So y is negative 2 at this dot right here. So I'm going to color it in. make sure that once you go to the value that you actually are on the zigzag line. We are. So now I'm ready to give the x value. Remember, the problem said, what is the value of x? Make sure when you're doing your CDA that you go back and read the problem. It's going to be so important that you actually read the problem so you know what you're looking for. So when I look at this value, I know that the x value here is 0. Okay? So that's my answer. Now for number 2, you're given a sequence. And remember, when we're given sequences, you have to find the pattern, which is our D. D is the number that continues the pattern. And then you're either going to write your explicit or recursive formula. And then whatever term I ask you to find is your N. Okay? So for number 2, we don't need the graph, which is why I moved it down. So we're just looking at these numbers: 11, 9, 7, and 5. Now, some of your problems on your CDA, you're given a word problem. For some of them, you may have to create the sequence. So they probably gave you the first term, the second, or sometimes they give you the term and they tell you how the pattern keeps going. All right? So we want to write the explicit formula. So I've written the formula right here for you. So you know this is not what I'm asking you for. I'm asking you to to plug in for the numbers that we can plug in for. Now, if I look at this sequence, I can definitely tell what A1 is, because A1 is the first number. Whatever the first number is in your sequence, that's A1. Remember that D is how you continue the pattern. You're either going to be adding or subtracting, and you're going to be adding or subtracting a number. Okay, so I'm going to put a pound. Pound means number. So what am I doing to continue the pattern? That is what D is. D is your pattern number. N is going to be the term that I asked you to find. So if I asked you to find the 10th term, N would be 10. If I asked you to find the third term, N would be 3. Okay, so this is the number, we'll say the nth term, because it's going to be whatever term I asked you to find. Alright, so what can we plug in our problem? Now notice in A, they asked you to simplify. Okay, so we're not just plugging into the formula and then we're going to let it go. We got to plug into the formula and then simplify. Notice that they don't ask you to find the 50th term until part B. So we can't do A and B together. We have to get an answer for A and then we can use B. So I'm going to plug in my A1 and my D. Well, to get from 11 to 9, what did you have to do? Subtract 2. What do we do to get from 9 to 7? Subtract 2. What do we do to get from 7 to 5? Subtract 2. So that means D is a negative 2. Make sure you pay attention to the sign, because if you put a positive 2 here and it's negative, you mess up all the rest of your problem. Alright? Then the only thing else we need to know is, what is A1? Well, A1 is the first term. So my A1 is going to be 11. Because when I look at this sequence, the first number is number 11. Now let's plug into this formula. Okay? So I have AN equals A1, which is 11, minus, because we are subtracting, 2. Okay, because my D is negative 2, that's why I wrote minus 2. Alright, and then for A, we don't know that the N is 50 until we get to part B. So for A, we're just going to leave it as N minus 1. So anytime they ask you to write the explicit formula and simplify, that means you're going to have a variable, and that variable is always N. Okay, now we have to simplify. So simplify means use the distributive property and combine your like terms. So when I distribute, what is the number that I'm distributing through my parenthesis? It should be this negative 2. Okay, that's what I got to multiply by the n, and I have to multiply it by this negative 1. The 11 we just bring down. Okay, so I'm going through this as if I'm teaching it for the first time, because I know A, some people probably weren't here, and B, it's been the weekend, so you probably forgot it. So please make sure you're paying attention. Alright, so we distribute negative 2 times n. That gives me negative 2n. Then we distribute negative 2 times negative 1, and that gives me a positive 2. Now we just need to combine our like terms. Well, the only terms that we can actually combine up here are the ones that do not have variables. So we can combine 11 and we can combine this 2. Okay? Make sure that you washed your sign on that 2, because 2 negatives do give me a positive. So my answer is a sub n equals 13, which I got by adding 11 plus 2 minus 2n, or if you wrote it opposite, you may have written negative 2n first. Just make sure that his sign is in front of him, and you may have put the 13 in the back. So these are 2 possible correct answers. Notice that wherever you wrote them at, you still have the n term. They're going to ask you for this type of answer on your CDA, and they always use the word simplify when they don't want you to leave it with this parenthesis here. Okay? Now that we have the formula, we can use this for part B. Part B says find the 50th term. Well, we already decided that n is 50 because that's the term that I asked you to find. So in this formula that we just found for part A, for part B, we're just going to plug in 50. Okay? So A 50, because I plug in 50 everywhere I see an n, and I see an n here and here. So that equals negative 2 times 50 plus 13. Okay? And we type that in the calculator. Negative 2 times 50 plus 13. And we get negative 87. So your answer will be A50, which means the 50th term in this sequence is negative 87. Okay? Now you probably have about 5 of these on your CDA. They are set up just like this in your study guide packet. So just remember, D is the pattern number, A1 is the first number in the sequence, and N is the specific term that they asked you to find. Alright, back to our graph. I hope everybody has that copied down and you were copying while I'm working. If you need to pause the video, Ms. Hall, you can. I'm going to go ahead and clear my board so that I can work 3 and 4. Alright, so for number 3, they're asking me to identify all of these wonderful things by using the graph. Alright, so domain, remember, is your x values, and we're looking at how far does the graph go to the left and how far does it go to the right. Anytime you see arrows on your graph, we know our answer should be negative and positive infinity. If your graph ends with dots that look like this, a closed circle or an open circle, then that's when we get to use brackets. Okay? When you have arrows, you use parentheses, and you will probably have infinity inside of there. Alright? So let's look at our picture. And let's decide what is the lowest x value. That one is going to go first. And then what is the highest x value for my graph. And when I say my graph, I'm talking about the zigzag line. So how far to the left, this way, okay, does this graph go? What is the biggest negative number that my zigzag line extends to? Negative 4. Very good. So you notice no other points go past this point. So that is the x value right there, -4. That's my lowest x value. And since we have a dot at the end of this graph, we use a bracket. Alright, on the other side of the graph, I look for how far to the right does it go. And it goes to this dot right here. It is not an arrow. It doesn't extend forever. So I'm going to use a bracket, and the biggest number that it goes to is +3. Notice that that little zigzag line does not extend past +3. So 3 is the highest value for the x's. And that's it. Now we're going to do the range. And that should be range, not wrangle. Okay? Alright, so the range is how far down and then how far up. So we're going to do down. How far down does it go? Remember, the negative number goes first. And then how high does the graph go? From the bottom to the top. Alright, how low does it go? Very good. The zigzag line does not go any lower than -2. Okay, so we're looking at the y-axis and we're trying to figure out how far down does it go. It goes down to -2. None of those dots drop below -2, so that is my lowest range number, my lowest y value. All right, what is the highest y value that we have on this graph? +5. Notice the graph does not extend past this value. This is the highest point, and it doesn't go any higher up than 5. So 5, and we get to use brackets. Okay, so we only use negative and positive infinity if you have a line that has arrows on both sides, like this. Then you would have said negative infinity to positive infinity for both your domain and your range. But when you see dots on it, that's when you have to give a number. All right, so let me clear this up, and now let's do the x-intercept. All right, please make sure that you're paying attention. This is your final review before your CDA, okay? And domain and range, you probably have about 6 or 7 problems on domain and range. So you have to understand that. Now, your x and your y-intercept. X-intercept is where does the zigzag line hit the the x-axis. So this is the point where it hits the x-axis. Remember, x goes side to side. So I just need to write that point. The x value for that point is a 1. And when we do x-intercepts, then the other number is always 0. So remember the rule, when you do x-intercept, x gets the number. When we do y-intercepts, y gets the number. Okay, that's the easy way to remember your x and your y-intercepts. Now let's go find the y-intercept. Well, remember the y-intercept is the same thing as our b in y equals mx plus b. So we're looking at the y-axis. Where does the zigzag line hit the y-axis? Right here. Okay, this is my y-axis. And that is the only point where the zigzag line hits that y-axis. So since it's the y-axis, the y gets the number, which is -2, and the x value will be 0. So both the x-intercept and the y-intercepts have zeros in them, and the number goes for which one you're finding. Alright, now we just need to find the highest point on the graph. Since this line does not continue forever, we do have a max and a min. When you have a line like this, the one I drew here, down over here in the red, this one has no max and it has no min because it continues on and on forever. But since this one doesn't, we do have a max and a min. So what is the highest point on the graph? I'm going to color this in orange. This is my maximum point. Okay, now I just need to give the x and the y value. Remember, you give x first, so we're going to go down. That's going to be -2. And the y value will go second, which is 5. Please make sure you don't get your numbers mixed up. I promise you they have 5, -2 on that CDA for you to pick and be just as wrong as can be. X goes first, so you're looking down, and then you look to the side. All right, min is the lowest point. Where is the lowest point on this graph? Well, we actually have 2 points that are tied for the minimum point. So we'd have to list both of these. Now on your CDA, I do not think that you have a tie. But in our case, we have 2, so I have to write both of them. Alright, so my lowest point, the number for this point would be, X would be 0 because we're on the y-axis, and the y value would be -2. Remember, this is the y-intercept, so we've already written this point one time. Alright, the other low point would be this point. So you give me X first, which is 3. And then you give me the y value, which is -2. And they are tied because they both exist at the y value of -2. So they're both at the minimum values of the graph. The graphs don't go any lower than these points. Alright, so that's it. That is our domain, range, x-intercepts, and our max and our min. Now there's one more thing that we do need to talk about, because I know it's going to be on your CDA. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this off. And if you did not get this copy, then raise your hand so Ms. Hall can pause the video. Otherwise, I'm going to clear it. Alright, so I forgot to write it up here. You guys can add this in for your write-up. We need to do the end behavior. And the end behavior is just that. As we look at where x approaches negative infinity, which means when we look at the negative side of x, when you see the negative, that's what it means. What happens to the y values of the line? When we look at the positive side of infinity, so we're looking at the positive side where the x numbers are positive, what's happening to your y value? Okay? So for the end behavior on the left side, I like to draw, I like to start with my y-intercept. And this will be my starting point every single time. So when it says, as x approaches negative infinity, I'm going to trace this half of the graph, okay? But you have to stay on the zigzag line. You're going to trace it all the way to the end. That's why it says end behavior. You're going to trace it to the end of the graph, but you have to start at the y-intercept. So notice that's where my pencil is, right here on the y-intercept. Let's trace the line. So I have to go up, and then I have to go down, and then it stops. So this is the end behavior. End is where your pencil, it stops, where it ends at. So this is the end right here. What is the y value at this point? 2. Notice that it said y goes to what? 2. Okay? That is the end behavior. What happens at the end of your graph? Now, if this was a line that kept going forever, like this, and we started at the y-intercept and we had to trace up, because there's an arrow, you would say that's positive infinity. If you were tracing and starting at the y-intercept and you trace down, then that would be negative infinity if this was a line that continued forever. Okay, I just want to make sure to differentiate that because you will see this on your CDA. Now, for our example, we're going to trace the positive side of infinity. So that means we're going to trace where x is positive. That's all this is saying, okay? It's just a fancy way of saying, look at where x is positive. So we're going to start with the y-intercept again. I changed my color so that we can see. And we're going to trace the graph. Wherever we end up is what we're going to put down here for our y. So I'm going to trace the positive side of my graph, and boom. That's where I end. I can't go past this point because my line doesn't go past this point. What is the y value right here where we ended at? -2. So those are my end behaviors. Okay? And that's it. That's all in behavior is. Now we can do number 4. This is the last one I'm going to go over with you. So make sure that you're paying attention. You guys are not doing a review tomorrow. I want to make sure that you have all of the time that you need for your CDA. So please make sure you're not talking and make sure you're paying attention. So our last example is a review of rate of change, which is slope. Okay, so you have to remember that because on your CDA, they don't always put the slope in parentheses right beside it. Matter of fact, they don't. So you have to remember when they say find the rate of change, that means find the slope. Alright, so this is the intervals that they want me to stick with. I have to stick with the interval where x is -2, so this is my x1, and this is my x2. So notice that they gave me 2 x's. Every time you see the brackets, that means they're giving you 2 x values. So in order for me to use the slope formula, that means I have to write my 2 points. So my first point is got a -2 in it, and the second point starts with a 0 because these are the x values of my points. Now I need to find the 2 y values. Well, where do we get those from? That pretty graph that we have up here. Okay, so let's look at our first point, which is where x is -2. So x is -2 right here. This is the x-axis, but I have to go up to my little zigzag line, which is right here. And what's the y value at this point? 5. So that's how we get the number 5. Notice that point is located where x is -2 and the y value is 5. Now let's go to the point where x is 0. X is 0 at this point right here. So if x is 0, what is the y value? -2. Very good. Now we're ready to find our slope. So we subtract the y's on the top and we subtract the x's on the bottom. So these get little 1's because they're the first point. These get little 2's because they're the second point. Make sure that you put the y's on the top, okay? Y values go on the top. So I have -2, which is my y2, minus my y1, which is 5, over x2, which is 0, minus x1, which is -2. Okay, and make sure when your numbers are negative that you make them very definite so you don't make a mistake and overlook it. Alright, so if we do change here, then we get -7 on the top, and if we do change on the bottom, we get 2. Alright, so I have my slope is -7 over 2. Alright, now remember you can also do this in the graph. So we could simply find the point. Well, we already know where the 2 points are. This was our -2, 5 point. And this was our 0, -2 point. So we can simply do rise over run. So how many spaces do we have to jump up? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is using the rise over run method, okay? And then I can run 1, 2, but look which way we ran. We ran to the left, which makes this 2 negative. So we get -7 over 2, which is the same thing that we got down here. Now, if you like this better, doing rise over run, circling the dot where the x value is 0, circle the dot where the x value is -2, and then just do rise over run, go for it, okay? I just want to make sure that you guys completely understand. So this is a review of everything that we've done. We did domain, range, x and y intercepts, the max and the min, and the end behavior, okay? We also did rate of change, and that was it. So the next time that you guys come into class, you're going to be doing your CDA. So please remember, you're going to be working on your study guide. The last 10 minutes of class, Ms. Hall will address any questions and check your work. So you're going to get a classwork grade. Please make sure that you do not get a 0 on your study guide because you was not working, okay? And this will be the last time that I get to talk to you guys. So I would like to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And I will see you guys in the new year. So if you bought me a present and you have something that you would like to give me, please hold off and wait until the new year. And I will be more than happy to accept it, okay? Let's make sure we're on our best behavior, because the class that has the highest CDA average and was best behaved is going to get a pizza party when I come back, okay? Thank you so much, and you guys have a wonderful day.